the joy of my life, and of course, my younger two boys. Jude is the child of my old age, who's looking at me right now. So anyway, it's great to have them. Thanks for allowing us again to be here. I want to share a story. It's the only story that I can share as well as I could share anything as close to my heart as I could. I can share this story. And so if you're looking at me and you're wondering about the personal reference, it's on purpose. I haven't come to brag. I haven't come to try to, as Bunch and Bree so eloquently stated earlier, to just get out in front. That's not my objective here tonight, but rather perhaps to take that stirring stick and put it into the core of your faith and start just twisting that thing around to let you know what giving does. And I know that we have an understanding of this, and I'm not here again as some tip of the iceberg that's just, no, I'm here rather just to stir it up. If I can stir it up. My wife said, you have 5 pages of notes. I said, baby, they're bullet points. We're all right here tonight. You're going to be all right. I'm not going to hold you long. I'm not exactly for sure how I stumbled upon the story, but if any of you have ever read anything by Nick Ripken, which is obviously an author's name, raise your hand tonight. You need to read his material. You need to take this book and you need to share it with every team leader that you have in your church. The Insanity of God. I promise you, it will absolutely revolutionize your ministry. It'll revolutionize people. It changed the culture of our church 4 or 5 years ago when we got our hands on this book. But he recounts a story. It's not within this book, but it's with an article that he wrote. And I'd like to open tonight with a story. It's a story of Nick Ripken, who was a missionary. Him and his wife were missionaries to several challenged nations. And as they were in this continent of Africa, they had visited South Africa, and the organization that they belonged to, not UPC obviously, but the organization that they belonged to sent them to a certain village. And it was within inside that village that Nick and his wife were going to experience something that from his own mouth, 30 years later, he would retell in the article with such passion and with such fervor. And I will not do the story justice, but I will retell it to you to begin tonight. In this small village, Nick was the main speaker for the service. And as he got behind the podium to speak that night, he retells his attitude, the type of attitude that he had. It was just kind of a superficial approach. Wasn't really stirred about what he was getting ready to say because he had been a part of something like this for a long time. He retells the story of the $10,000 offering that he was going to give this village. Seemed to work for them.
That's the glass he used, actually.
That's probably the glass he used. It takes a little Cajun.
Same water too.
It's probably the same water. There's a little Creole in there somewhere. But he tells a story, and he gets up behind the microphone and begins to. He opens up and he says this: I'm going to give the organization that sent us wants to give this village $10,000. And it was nothing for him. He had been a part of this type of thing over and over and over again. So it became second hat to him, second nature to him. And so with not a lot of passion and not a lot of fervor with this offering, he tells the villagers that this, no racism obviously, but this North American church that is predominantly white sent over a white missionary to give a gift of $10,000, Pastor John, to an African village. And all of a sudden, he said it just exploded in there. And the explosion was that it was a transfer of not $10,000, but a transfer of love from people that would never meet them. And a spirit of giving broke out in that little village. And people that would make $1 a day, maybe, if they made anything at all, the spirit of giving, a book of Acts type giving came into that conference, came into that little service. And all of a sudden, through giving, the kids begin to get a hold of it. The parents begin to get a hold of it. And they were taking all the money that they had on them at that time, bringing it to the altar. And they would come and they would dance. I don't have the room to dance for you tonight, but they would come and dance as an expression of worship and act like they were going to give it and pull it back, and act like they were going to give it and pull it back. Just singing songs and smiling, and this spirit of happiness and revival had broken out in this small village over this money, the promised money. Through all of that, kids were going to their parents, getting all the money that they could, going down to the neighborhood store and exchanging those larger coins for smaller ones so that they could make multiple trips up to the altar, so we can give more, so that we can give more. But through it all, an elderly lady sat over to the left-hand side, and very stoic in her personality, very stoic in her expression. She was not making a lot of movement. In fact, it was concerning to Nick, and he began to watch, and all of a sudden, as the 3-hour display of giving was coming to a close, she got up. She began to walk her way to the front. And in the front side of an apron, she put her hand in there and pulled out those withered hands, held and clutched something extremely delicately tight. And she looked at what was in her hand, realizing exactly what was getting ready to take place. She unfolded that napkin with such reservation, and took whatever it was out of there and laid that upon the altar, turned around and walked back to her seat as she tucked that apron back, or tucked that napkin back into her apron. The service concluded, and Nick walked over there and looked down at the coin and began to ask the locals there what this coin was, what it represented. And the leader of that village took that coin and walked back to her, sat down. 10 minutes later, he came back and began to tell the story. It's a British halfpenny. It was beautiful. It was the treasure, not just of her, but of her heritage. It had been passed down to her for her, let's call it her retirement. It was when she was no longer able to do any work, she would go and cash that in and do the best that she could to live off of that. It was everything. It was a biblical moment, Tracy, when she stepped in, just like that, the two mite situation. She steps in this situation and exemplifies it with such perfection. Because the British halfpenny is not in circulation. There's no value at all to that coin. Not a solitary value at all. It's absolutely worthless. And yet she clutches that and holds on to that and keeps that dear to her, never allowing it to go too far off of her person, because she believes that it is the hope of my future. It is the hope of my family's future. In fact, this coin may outlive me. It's going to be something that's going to pay for. It's going to be something. And yet there is no value to it at all. Nick took that. He said, if I leave a large offering, can I take that with me? Not telling the woman, they exchanged it. It was worthless. They wouldn't have got any return value on that thing. So he took that and holds on to it still today, 30 years later, as a reminder that there is no price too big for obedience.
Right.
There is no sacrifice too great for obedience.
Right.
Can I say it one more time? To people that understand more than most in this world, that there is no price too great for obedience. I will be very candid tonight. It's up for debate. There's probably argument, and I may biblically lose this argument. Greater minds than I sit in this place here tonight. But about 2 or 3 months ago, when we took up our latest She's for Christ offering, it's been something that has driven our church for the last 10 years. And I don't want to take all night. I could literally take all night telling you of the miraculous things that have taken place at the church today. I'll share a couple of those with you. But 2 months ago, I stood up, preached the message. We didn't advertise it. We never do. We don't do car washes at the church today. We don't do bake sales at the church today. If you do that for She's for Christ, that is absolutely fantastic. And I say do more of them. Do everything you can. Real McCoy, the whole 9 yards. It's for the greatest cause. Giving to the kingdom is the greatest cause. But we simply get up behind the microphone and make a challenge now. And that challenge is for a sacrificial offering. And I had all the families come together, and they came together as families this time. It's the first time we've ever done it. Up to the front, get together as a family. And as a family, we're going to pray. And as a family, we're going to obey. And this is what I said that is potentially debatable. I said, you can outgive God. And the response there at the homestead was the same response here, where none of you have an idea who I am. It was crickets, silence. Because all my life, I've always heard the same thing. You cannot outgive God. I know Luke 6:38. I know that when you give, it'll come back. It'll be a good measure. It'll be pressed down. It'll be shaken together. It'll be running over. I understand the fact that God established the law of the harvest, or better understood as the law of giving. I understand those principles. I teach those all the time at the church today. And we are who we are because of that. But when we give out of obedience, outside rather, the bounds of obedience, we can outgive God. When we give disobediently, we are putting ourselves in a place where His grace, come on now.
Yeah. Right.
I told the church, I don't want you to give a penny more than what the Holy Ghost is telling you to give.
Yeah.
But if we're going to call ourselves apostolic, it got thick in here right now.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
But if we're going to call ourselves apostolic,
Yeah.
All right.
we need to be obedient
Yes.
in all measures.
Come on.
Right.
That's right.
In every measure. It went from bunch of, I'm telling you, it is so thick right here.
Okay.
It feels good.
Yeah.
It feels right. But when we give, we have to give underneath the banner of absolute, complete obedience to God. Nothing more. Not a penny more, John. Not a penny more than what He says give. I have given outside the boundaries of obedience. And it has taken months for me to recover. It has taken years for me to learn this principle. Years until I've become obedient to this principle. I have given, and it's 3 or 4 months later, I'm like, my God, where's it going to be pressed down? When's it going to be running over? The only thing running over, I got a wife running after me. I got kids going around without food on the table, you know, growing my own veggies in the backyard. What in the world? John and Tracy are sending us care packages. John ain't gonna send me nothing.
That's fine.
My fitness pal, you know. But I said that on that day. Something happened in that church.
Yeah.
I said, do not outgive God. And I had a man come to me afterward. He said, I'm just going to tell you, never meet him. I won't even say his name. He said, I had a number in my mind when I came in here today. And that number was $4,000. I was going to give $4,000 when I came in here today. And that's what I was going to give. I already settled it. This is what I'm going to give. This is all I have to give to be able to give. And when I got here, I got my family up to the front. We began to say, God, not what can we give?
Mm-hmm.
Not what will we give?
Well.
But what do you want us to give?
Yeah.
And when he asked the Lord that, the Lord gave him a number, and he said, bro, it's less than half of what I came in here to give. He said, I was so disappointed because I want to give that, because I want my family to be blessed. I want to be blessed, bro. I said, and you will be blessed.
Right. Because of obedience.
You will be blessed when you obey. There will be a time in which you come in there with a less than half number, and you come up, if you would, and you say, God, what do you want me to give? And the Lord begins to say something like this: I want you to give $4,000, but I don't have it, but it's not there. I don't know how we'll do that. I don't know how we can project that. I'm telling you, something supernatural took place in that church like it has never. And we have a church of giving. It gives and gives and gives. Right. We have averaged the church today. Raina, you're right on target. I haven't even touched my notes. We've averaged 40,000 since day one. We have averaged 40,000 of what we call outside missional giving per year.
Wow. Our
church has just given out an average of 40 grand, just leaves our church.
Praise God.
Here recently, it went from, at the 6-year marker, we were at around the 10%. We were celebrating that we were giving away 10%.
Yeah.
It wasn't going in my 401k. We didn't have a building yet.
Oh.
Listen, I was a 32-year-old man that walked into the doctor's office because my wife told me, you have shingles. I walked in, broke in, because I was working 60 hours there, managing and trying to build a church. And I know what it feels like. Just wondering, when's that break gonna happen? When's that church? John, you know, when's it gonna happen for us? When's it gonna take place for us? When's this thing gonna be poured out in this congregation? Holy Ghost. But at that 6-year marker, I just didn't put 2 and 2 together until the other day when I'm trying to put this together. All of a sudden I realized it was when our church began to tithe its income to missional giving, outside giving, not inside the church, outside. Whether it's organizational, whether it's a missionary that comes in. I've had kids walk up to the front, you've done the same thing, missionary kids. I said, this offering today is for them. At our 10-year anniversary that the Felds were at, the Holy Ghost hit me like a brick. We had a missionary family that was getting ready to go on the field and said, you take up an offering and you get them a car, and don't you make them get a car. And I walked up there and I said, the Lord just told me that we need to give an offering in order to get the Summers on the field. Let's get them on the field. We took a $25,000 offering up that night for this family. We've had missionaries, we've had evangelists come in, and they've left with $15,000 checks. Why? Because our church is understanding now how to be obedient.
Oh.
Yeah.
But you know what we've seen in the last 10 years? We've seen jobs. And better jobs.
Better job.
Yeah.
And when I mean better jobs, I mean better jobs.
Yeah.
We've seen raises and bonuses,
Yes.
sales and commissions.
Uh-huh.
We've seen benefits and settlements,
Yeah.
estates and inheritance,
Yes.
interest and income, rebates
Yes.
and returns. You know what we do on our family apps? We celebrate when the checks are in the mail,
Yes.
when there's gifts and
Yes.
surprises and bills are paid off,
Yes.
and debts
Yes,
become
Tamales.
demolished.
Yes.
We celebrate
Yes.
when royalties
Yes.
are received. Oh, we celebrate those factors.
Yes.
When a man tells me the Lord told me not to pay off our home, or not to sell our home on the market, I said, well, I thought you said God told you to come up to Tulsa. He said he did. Been attending our church for years, lived an hour away. I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, the Lord told me not to put our home on the market. I said, bro, what are you going to do? He said, well, you told us that we need to start praying circles. Just circle it in prayer. I didn't necessarily say physically, just put your arms around that thing and begin to pray Lord, your will be done. Your will be done. But he took it literally and began to circle his 2-acre property every single day. Every single day, Ryan. Every day. Every day. Corporate pilot, when he'd come home late at night, 2 in the morning, he'd circle his property. He circled it so many times, John, that he wore a path on his 2-acre piece of property around that property. He said, I've anointed it. I've taken my kids on prayer walks around my property. We've prayed over it. And then all of a sudden, one day, drinking coffee in his living room.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, this is an obedient giver. One of the first responders in the church when it comes to giving. Lady walked up and knocked on his door. He opened the door. She said, sir, I don't know if you're selling the home or not, but I want to buy it.
Jesus.
She said, my husband passed away in an accident, and he and I had a dream that we would live in a little yellow house on a couple acres worth of property. And I want to buy your house, but I want to buy it with cash. There's no need to get realtors involved. Let's just go. You tell me what you want for it. He said, well, this is what I have to have. Negotiated himself down. This is what I need to have. He said, bro, it wasn't a penny less than what I felt like I was going to ask for it. And she said, I'll meet you at closing in 30 days. 2 weeks later, opens the door. It's the same lady. She said, you know, I was thinking, I don't really want to move any of my stuff. So I went ahead and sold it all. I was just wondering if you'd be willing to sell everything in this home, all the decor, all the beds, all the furniture, everything. I want your dishes. Anything that's not of value to you, I'll take it. Just get out. He said, but I'll have to replace them. I was planning on moving these. And she said, whatever you want for them. He said, bro, some of that stuff was, 3 or 4 years old. I didn't want to take advantage of it, but I couldn't replace it without looking at the cost of what we were going to have to replace it with. And so then I just came back with what I thought was a fair price. I didn't want to, gouge the situation. She said, that's awesome. She met him at closing, cash for the house, cash for the stuff, and he walked away and came up into the tallest. I'm telling you, story after story. I've seen it over and over and over and over and over again. From an 18-year-old boy that got a call. No, it wasn't a man. It wasn't even a pastor. It was a boy. It was his first job, and he said, on my first check, this is what I'm going to do. And he gave his entire check to She's for Christ. His entire check. Every dollar. He said, I was standing there. His first job out of college, out of high school. He's 18 years old. He's got his eye on a little girl, and they're going to get married. He's not going to go to college. He's going to work with his hands. He can't get over her. We all knew it was going to happen. But he's trying to work his way up in the company, sweeping some floors, and just humbled by the experience. And his boss walks up to him and says, I don't understand what the world's going on. He said, I'm sitting in my office. He said, I can't get over it. This is a corporation.
Yeah.
Not a mom and pop shop. It's a corporation. His boss comes up and says, hey, bro, I have some petty cash. I don't know why, but I feel compelled to give you this. But don't say anything to anybody.
Yeah.
And he hands him an envelope. He's only been on the job for 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Doesn't even know the boss. Just interviewed with him once. He opened it up. He said, Pastor, you'll never believe it. I said, oh, come on now.
Yeah.
He said it was exactly the amount that I gave for She's for Christ.
Yeah. Obedience.
He said, I had my eye on a guitar, because he's our lead guitarist. He got the Holy Ghost through our church. Plays guitar, teaches Sunday school class, him and his wife now. He said, I have my eye on a guitar, and I think I'm going to go buy it. I want a new guitar for the church. I said, go buy it. Go buy that thing. He went and bought that thing. He's playing it. Came back to me 2 weeks later. Said, can I talk to you for a second? I said, sure you can. He said, my boss walked up to me again. I said, you kidding? You got an envelope in your pocket? He said, no, it's not in my pocket. I said, what did he say? He said, I don't know why, but I feel compelled to give you this raise. Been there about 4 weeks. I said, what was the raise? You don't have to tell me the amount, but what was percentage-wise? He said, I did some figuring. I'm figuring it at 700% of my She's for Christ pledge.
Yeah.
Come on now. I got dozens and dozens every year. Year one, I didn't know how we were going to do it, bro. I did not know how we were going to do it. Because when we started the church, I'm ignorant enough to ask questions to the Lord like this. Lord, what do I need to do to never have to worry about money?
Yeah.
We started, it's an expensive city. It's a church city. And we felt called at that time to the most expensive area in the city. Why is that? Why does God do stuff like that? He push me out to behind the tracks? No, but it's right there. So we started right there. We walked up to the first building, and when we walked up to the first building, I'm looking inside. I got this big old grin on my face, and Raina's standing right next to me, and I'm like, baby, do you see it? Do you see the church? She said, where? 600 square feet, that's all we had.
Yeah.
Oh, but what we had. We shoved 40 people in there. Before we moved out of there, we had 54 in there. Ooh, we had some services in that old little coffee shop.
Yeah.
But I said, Lord, what do I have to do in order to never, ever have to worry about money? And he said one word. Give.
Give.
Yeah.
Give. Oh. Give.
That's what he said here. I don't know how many pastors are in this place, but I got an answer for some of the things you've been looking for and seeking for.
Yeah. How to book on it.
I'm nobody. I'm the adopted son of a police officer, and I should not be where I am, but I've learned something, that when I obey, portals that would never open,
Jesus.
and they would never open, they begin to open when I obey. Obedience does something. It pulls open the curtains of heaven, and it pours out things that would not normally come out to his people. I am a person of promise, but until I learn how to be obedient to him. And so on year one, we started something at our church. We started a campaign called Share Your Story. And the reason why we started it is because I felt like the Lord said, why would you celebrate the giver, the man, more than you celebrate my return? So I said, reserved for offering time is every miracle. We didn't get up there and say, come on now, you owe 10% to God. You better give your 10%, because if not, you're going to be cursed with a curse.
Yeah.
Now that's Bible.
Yeah.
There is a time for that. There's a time for teaching that. But we use that opportunity. Those 2 minutes, if they didn't feel comfortable doing it and they couldn't do it under 2 minutes, I did it for them. We want to do that for some people, by the way. Get out of control real quick.
Yeah.
Talking about trips to the Walmarts and everything else. We started using that time. Do you know what happened over the course of that? Oh my goodness. All of a sudden, it was like a plague in the church. We didn't have a lot of giving units. About 15 units at that time. And 15 units, we raised $3,600, our first SFC offering.
Praise
And
God.
something happened in our church.
Wow.
Our NAM director walked in unexpectedly on a Sunday morning with a missionary. Just walked right in. I said, hey, Brother Moss, would you please preach for us? He said, no, I'm come here just to visit. I just wanted to bring him and show him the work that is going on. I just wanted to bring him. And something weird, he's walking around in my church. He's an older gentleman, and I'm just this, he's a man, you know, and I'm just like, you want a cup of coffee? You know, I'm just trying. And he's walking around and he's doing this. He's going, walks into another room. This time we had like a 1,800 square foot facility, and I'm looking at everybody like, what's going on? And he's sniffing. Just sniffing from room to room. Steps up to the pulpit. He's got a big, deep voice. At his home church, when he pastored, he had a radio microphone. He didn't have to scream and become, passionate. He just talked, and his voice was just booming enough. And he got up behind the pulpit, and he began to quiver under the Spirit. And he said, when I walked in, I took a deep breath. And when I did, I smelled something familiar to me. And it smelled like a spirit of giving.
Wow.
Yeah.
It did something in our church, man. Whew. It was like that alabaster box that was broken open.
Oh.
That sacrifice from that one woman. The Bible says what happened? The fragrance filled the entire. So you know what took place? Everybody was refreshed from that one somebody.
Oh.
They may have judged her. They may have looked down, but it was refreshing even in their judgment.
Right.
And that spirit of sacrifice that was in our church, it just grew and grew, and it went from 3,000. Then that next year, She's for Christ just kind of became that thing for us. And we give to Christmas for Christ and to Tupelo's Children's, man, everything that comes away. I'm like, you give as best you can. And if sometimes the offering is not that great, and I'll just pray about it, and I'll send them a little bit more if the Lord tells me to. We try to send to everything we can because we know. But it went from 3. It went up to 8. 3 years in, we're around the 13 mark or the 14 mark, or 5 years in, we're around the 18 mark. I don't know what in the world's going on. It's just going up and up and up. 5 years in, 6 years in, we're over 20, around 25 at the 6-year mark. At the 7-8 year mark, we're up around the $30,000-$35,000 mark. These people are just giving. We're not pushing them. We're not prying on them. I'm not breaking the back. It's just that they know.
They know.
Yes.
They know what happens.
My God.
I don't have to convince them. I just say, come on up. And you begin to pray. And when you pray, you be obedient. Don't you do anything you're not comfortable doing. Don't you do anything you don't feel. And all of a sudden, the secretary runs to me. And she hands me the amount this year when that giving broke out. And I wept, and my wife wept, and the church just rejoiced because over 53,000 came in.
Thank you, Jesus.
And here's why I'm rejoicing.
Thank you, Jesus.
I'm rejoicing because I know the God
Yes.
of that law.
Yes.
And I know how to activate the God of that law. And if we want our finances to increase,
Come on.
if we want that to take place, how many bivocational missionary pastors and home missionaries do we have in here? If you're bivocational and you're a pastor, I want you to raise your hand. We've got a half a dozen over that. At 6 years, we went from nothing. I walked in and I said, baby, it's time. For the last 5.5 years, we have served the church. It's been a walk by faith, but God has always prevailed.
Yeah.
Yes.
I sat at our kitchen table and I said, baby, God just told me this is what we have to give. She said, honey, it's not there. I said, well, I can't tell you why I feel this way. She said, honey, I'm telling you, it's not there. I said, we got to give it. And so she wrote the check out and we began to give that. And it was 4 or 6 weeks later, we went and preached just a kind of a revival service, just one service there on one night. And as we were there, the pastor said, I've never done this. It was a week-long revival, different ministers every night. He said, we've never done it. We've done this thing for 12 years. But the Lord just told me we need to take up an offering for the Longstreth. And I just began to just break down. I was full-time at that moment. It was tough. We were living. It was paycheck to paycheck, you know. It was just a rough time for us. And the pastor said, we're gonna have an offering for them, and they came up and they gave in the offering. We preached, and the Spirit of the Lord broke, and in the altar call, I'm praying for this lady to get the Holy Ghost, and I've got one hand on her, my wife's right there, and the other hand's just laying to the side, and I'm just, come on, you're right there. What you feel right now, all of a sudden something patted my hand, and I just put it in my pocket, and I'm trying not to get distracted. Boom, patted my hand again. And a dozen times, people were walking up after church, just giving checks and checks and checks and cash, and I'm shoving it in my pocket, and I'm looking ridiculous. She got the Holy Ghost, though.
Yeah.
Praise God.
She got the Holy Ghost, though. Might have been because my wife's faith was, I was, what in the world? And I went to the pastor's office, and I pulled out handfuls, and I was going to put it on it. He said, absolutely not. I told you we were taking up an offering for you tonight. We didn't count none of it. Just put it in our pocket. Went back to the hotel room, laid it all on the bed, weeping, crying, just broken. Why? With $7,900.
Wow.
I need to come here more often. I needed bigger pockets and bigger hands. I wasn't a big enough man, obviously. What happens
Obedience.
when you are just obedient? It's taking some of our church members away from being able to do certain things. But they came back and they shared their story, and when they did, oh my goodness. But it's not just a private blessing. The people have gotten a hold of this.
Yeah.
Oh, the people now, you just let us loose, because we know what happens when the opportunity to give alms.
Yes.
That unexpected thing comes along, and the Lord says, give to that.
Yes.
Is he not the God that owns the cattle on a... Why would he need me? Now you hear me. Why would he need us? We're all ministers. We understand where this is going. He does not need me.
No.
He wants me
He wants
to
us.
give.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Because you will unloose me in your life.
Yes.
And what I can do,
Oh.
you cannot measure.
Ah!
Yes.
What I am able to do, you cannot measure. We can measure our offering, but we cannot measure God's offering.
Right.
Stood before the district youth presidents. Drake, were you there? I was nervous that day. I don't normally get that. My mouth is all dry. They didn't bring me no water. John wasn't there. He just cotton mouth up there, just nervous. Looking out at all these skilled men, thinking, what in the world would I have to offer? But it was that morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, that God gave me a personal revelation that I'm sharing with you before we have a time of obedience. Here's what the Lord told me. Woke me up at 4 in the morning. I text Brother Enzi, text me about 7. I said, bro, I've been up since 4. Man, my apologies, because it's not going to come about in a 1, 2, 3 ABC outline. He said, you do what you feel. God took me to Genesis chapter number 1. Because God asked me, he said, where did giving originate? And I'm thinking, oh, it has to be early. He wouldn't ask me that. It has to be early. So I'm thinking about Abraham, thinking about this gift that he's going to get. No, it's got to be earlier than that. So I'm pushing back early on into even the second generation, saying, well, what about when Cain and Abel and Abel's wonderful sacrificial offering that pleased God? No, it was earlier than that. All the way back to the first chapter of Genesis, where it says this. In Genesis 1, verse number 15, it says, and let them be for lights. in the firmament of the heaven to give, everybody say, give light
Give light.
upon the earth, and it was so. God revealed this to me. I said, Lord, what is so important about this? If I've ever had clarity in a hotel room with the Lord, it was at this moment. And the Lord said, I created giving.
Yeah.
He said giving was a part of my creative process.
Wow.
Wow.
And if it was a part of my creative process, Barron, then it is supernatural. Giving is supernatural. It was never supposed to be man-driven.
My God.
Right.
I looked down. You remember, I looked down. I said, we have never once played a promotional video in our church. They laughed. I don't need to tell them
Right.
what Tupelo does with the money. I don't need to say that 60% goes here and, hey, guess what? 40% is going to help with Bible quizzing. It's going to help with church camps. It's going to help with youth convention. I don't need to tell them that. Do you know what I tell them? That obedience in our giving unlocks
Yeah.
an area that all of us have need of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
Jesus.
If we have the vision for what God is wanting to do,
Yes.
ladies and gentlemen,
Yes.
we need to have the backing
Yes.
of that vision.
Yes.
And it takes finances to have the backing of that vision. And I've told our church since day one, I said, the Lord is, or us, we are not going to be able to pay for the building that we need.
Right.
Amen.
When we were 600 square foot, when we were 1,800 square foot, when we were 5,000 square foot, we moved 3 times. We remodeled 9 times in between them. And those just trying to keep up, I said, the next move, we are not able to afford it. Now, I'm looking around some of the cities, the 5 million people, the vision that you guys have in a city of 89,000. That's not going to be cheap. But is there a difference to the Lord between $1
No.
Come on.
and 10 million?
No. No.
There is no difference
No
to the Lord. in that.
difference.
And somewhere along the line, we've got to get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
We've got to plant the seeds in the ground.
Yes.
Somewhere along the line, we've got to become obedient to Him and say, we'll step out from among them and be separate. And you know what I felt? When John called me and said he's not going to be there, I said, bro, when we were going to be there and you told me we were doing dates, I said, the Lord spoke to me and said, you will be delivering the message to this great congregation of pastors and ministers and their family. And you tell them one thing, that if they will learn how to give obediently, I will pour out abundant blessings. You hear me now? It's not just going to affect you in your church, in the corporate body. It's going to hit your families. And when it hits your families, it's going to be explosive. When it hits your families, you're not going to need to get up there and try to pry it out of them. They're going to say, how, when, what can we give to? I wonder if we wouldn't stand to our feet right now. Why don't you lift your hands right now? Let this thing flow out.
Oh, God, you got to burn. Do it now.